What are we hitting today, James?
RDLs. We've got some RDLs.
We going for a PR?
Hey guys, so today what we're going to be talking about is exercise selection. So I think this video is primarily addressed to people with scoliosis, but in general I think if you're a bodybuilder and if you're prone to any kind of injuries, exercise selection I think is of the utmost importance, whether you have scoliosis or not. Personally, I think for me, exercise selection has literally changed the game. So I think this was one of my major plateaus. So the two things that plateaued me for so long was controlling volume, which I'll go over in another video, and then exercise selection, so picking exercises that work well for me. Now, how do you know that an exercise is working well for you and that it's a good exercise for you? So for instance, if I take Romanian deadlifts, what I'm doing here, for an example. So for instance, with these, they feel phenomenal to me. I can load musculature that I can't normally load and do it relatively safely and relatively well. I don't feel as though I'm going to get injured. It's not an exercise that I really want to push up too much. However, it is not perfect. So there is a few things that I would like to change about my selection when it comes to RDLs. So the thing with this is I do notice that RDLs can give me a little bit of upper back irritation. And maybe a good morning might not do that. So that's the thing. That's something that you might have to take into account. I'm probably going to experiment with good mornings next meso cycle, but probably just continue with RDLs for now and see how we go. See if the upper back irritation continues, because I changed to a flat press on my pressing movement, so a floor press, and that seems to have gotten rid of a lot of the irritation. And then next I've got some split squats. So for me, I love a good split squat. It absolutely destroys my glutes. And the reason that I've picked a split squat instead of something like maybe a hip thrust is, again, hip thrusts tend to give me upper back irritation, and I don't even feel like they're that good of a movement for me personally. But split squats tend to absolutely annihilate my glutes. Although, from what we know, muscle damage or muscle soreness is not really a very reliable indicator of hypertrophy. I generally feel like I do very, very well on split squats. I think it's just the extremely stretched position that the glute is in during forward lean at the bottom of a split squat. I feel like that could be what's causing this amount of muscle, of delayed onset muscle soreness. But I think in general, the split squat for me, it's fantastic. The loading on my back in this is completely fine. It's only 30 kilos. I can load probably 80 kilos on my back and it's still relatively fine. So 30 is no issue, and I don't think I'll be progressing anywhere near 80 anytime soon on the split squat, because we're going nice and slow and we're keeping the reps relatively high. I'm not going for any sort of rep range that's lower than 5 in pretty much any exercises nowadays, just because my main goal is hypertrophy, and that's something you always need to take into account. With exercise selection, the main thing you need to know is what is your context, what are you trying to achieve, and how do you get there. So for me, I've had to swap out quite a few exercises because a lot of them just don't meet my context. For instance, if that was just a rep range, so if I was going less than 5, that obviously doesn't meet my context, because what we know about hypertrophy is that we're trying to increase mechanical tension, and that's over, yes, a variety of rep ranges, but for the most part, most intelligent bodybuilders, from what I know and from the people that I've interviewed and researched, they don't tend to go really anything below 5 to 6 reps, because what you're doing there is just the load is too high for the trade-off. And then this is fantastic if you have scoliosis, because in general, I think with scoliosis, you want to stick to those higher rep ranges, because I think you're just more prone to injuries, because you have irritation through the back, and then if you're more prone to injuries because of your scoliosis, because obviously for a lot of people it's idiopathic. I feel as though I might have some sort of other tendon or ligament issue that caused my scoliosis that causes other issues. So this is why I make exercise selection such a priority. So yeah, this is just your standard old hamstring curl. Nothing special about this. What is great about it is you can train the hamstring in the lengthened position, but you're also making sure that you're very stable, there's not really much movement, and there's pretty much no way you can injure yourself on this unless you set the hamstring curl up really badly or anything like that. It's very hard to injure yourself on this if volume is controlled, which I'll go over in maybe my next video, because I think it's a very, very important topic to cover volume. But yes, I think especially on the lower body for scoliosis, if you don't figure out how exercise selection works and you don't come to the reality that if you don't sort of realize that you don't need to do a barbell squat to gain leg size, then I think it's very, very interesting to realize that you can do a banded leg press and get some absolutely phenomenal work done. So for me, I haven't found an exercise yet on my upper body, my lower body, or anything that does more for me than the leg press. Especially when banded with lifting shoes. The sleeves don't really contribute anything here. They just make me feel a little bit safer, as I am going to really try and increase the load over the next few months. But what we're doing here is we're not lifting with our ego. We're going nice and slow. We're going nice and deep. And the way I can go deep safely is through the bands. So as the leg press gets lower and the tension increases from the band, the weight is effectively reduced. So what happens there is at the bottom of the movement, where my quadriceps and my hamstrings and my glutes are at their weakest, I feel the least tension, which is, I think, is the best. And one also, if you look at a lot of the studies, they show that a variable, I believe it's called variable resistance training, which is basically using bands or anything like that, chains, anything like that, is very, very good for hypertrophy. So that is my main goal there. And if you look at anyone in the British bodybuilding scene, it's a bit of a tongue twister, they tend to use a lot of bands and a lot of variable resistance training, and they seem to be almost the forefront of bodybuilding in 2019, which I think is phenomenal for many, many reasons. But yeah, that's basically my rant on exercise selection. Let me know if you have any questions. Please pick your exercises wisely. If you have any questions, DM me on Instagram. Listen to my recent podcast on hypertrophy with Lyndon Purcell. And yeah, thank you very much for listening, and have a fantastic night, and train wisely.
Almost any program that someone's like, HIIT is the way to go, or high frequency training is the way to go, or emphasis, de-emphasis sessions, things like that. Almost every training program that promotes a greater degree of hypertrophy than another is simply finding a way to generate more force, not suffer too bigger consequences from that.
Right, yeah.
I guess, if that makes sense.
Right, and then I believe